Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'm joined by a couple of wonderful guests today. We're going to be talking about the adoption of AI tools in schools. So I think I'll start with some introductions, and I'll start with you, Vera, if you don't mind. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your perspective on this topic?
Sure. My name's Vera Cubero, and I'm the Emerging Technologies Consultant for North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And I'm also a veteran educator. I was a classroom teacher for 14 years and then worked in school and district level as ITF or digital learning specialist. And so my perspective is that there needs to be more partnership with educators. I think a lot of times things are designed based on what somebody thinks is needed. And sometimes they don't go to the source and they don't really talk to the teachers. And if you're designing to fill a need that doesn't exist, then it's kind of flawed from the start. Or if you're designing, to fill a need that in a way that is not going to be applicable to the classroom or useful to teachers. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is to bridge that gap between the vendors and the educators. I think when tools are designed with input from educators, that it's not just going to be a product, it's going to actually be building a solution to meet a need in the classrooms.
Fantastic. Welcome. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Pete, how about you? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm Pete Just. I am a retired CTO and currently the Consortium of School Networking AI Project Director, and do a number of other things and work a lot with superintendents, school districts, CTOs. And I'd say my perspective on this is that you really need to figure out what you're doing first. It's sort of like if you're a carpenter, you need to read the plans. You need to figure out, like, what is a project? Where do the 2x4s go? Before you pick up the hammer. So when we're talking about tools, it's really about making sure that, AI can be a very innovative and powerful tool, and it can do a number of different things. So which of those things are you wanting to do? Are you wanting to focus on the instructional side? Or are you wanting to focus on operational perspectives and, implementations? When we think about AI, there's even multiple different types of AI. Which ones are we thinking about? Obviously, generative AI has been the one in the news and the one we're typically talking about when we say AI in schools. But there's predictive AI tools and obviously tools that are helpful as intelligent tutors, personalization of learning. There's a number of things you can do with this set of tools. And you really need to first start with an understanding of what are you trying to accomplish. In other words, what's the why?
Fantastic. And actually, Pete, that rolls very nicely into I think, a great jumping off point in terms of a question that I can ask you both. We talk about adopting an AI tool, but it's not really an event. It really is more of a process, it sounds to me. And I guess I would start with you and validate that statement. Is that your interpretation as well? And if so, can you share a little bit about how you would go about structuring that process of evaluating and adopting AI tools?
I think I'd agree with what you're saying. And to the point I was making earlier, I think it starts with what's your strategic plan as a school district, and then taking from that, all right, what are our objectives then that we're trying to accomplish, and then looking for, what are the tools, or actually I would start with what is the approach we should then use in considering our AI practices and policies. And honestly, I think that in the process, it really should start with AI literacy for the administrators, for the staff, especially for the teachers. Just like when we rolled out devices, we at least in our district, we gave out the same Chromebooks that the students were going to have to the teachers, like a year in advance. And gave them training. And this is why this could be a great tool in the hands of your students. Why would you do something different just because it's software, not a piece of hardware? I think that's a proven that you want to use. But it starts with AI literacy and helping teachers understand, honestly, what administrative tasks might be lifted off of their shoulders. And as they start understanding that, then they can better kind of put an understanding on it. And on top of that, at the same time, putting in certain guardrails for student use. Because if you say nothing, students are just going to use it without any care for consequences or whatever. And there shouldn't be consequences, I guess, if you haven't put any guardrails in place. So I think North Carolina's done a good job in terms of like saying like, these are some simple ways that in a classroom you could talk about AI, when you can use it, when you can't, kind of like a red, yellow, green approach, stoplight approach to it. And so I think those are good ways to think about it, but it takes a conversation at the cabinet level, moving down all the way to the classroom level with teachers before you start getting into buying specific tools, I think.
Vera, any thoughts on that? Do you agree that this is a process?
Oh, well, I would say definitely. And I would say with AI more so than other technology that we've had before. And so I agree with everything that Pete said and I think that when, like with devices, we started out doing that really well in a lot of schools where the training was provided when they got Chromebooks, but then they just kind of started handing them out and kind of slacked up on the training. And we never really got the transformation that everybody thought we were going to have. And I think that's because they tried this one and done approach. And with AI in particular, I'm constantly telling people this is not a one and done. It's got to be job embedded in ongoing professional development. It's not like teaching somebody how to use a Google Doc and then you can just walk away and they're professional. And then of course there's the risk associated with it as well. And just the fact that it's still really emerging and they're unpredictable, things change quite frequently. And so I think more so than anything before, this has to be a process. And we follow, in North Carolina, we recommend a 4-step roadmap based off of AI for Education.io's roadmap, where first thing that happens is leadership. They need to be upskilled first because AI is also something you can't effectively make policy on if you don't understand it. Or you could, but it wouldn't be effective. So we recommend that first, and then getting some guidelines and policy into place, and then giving the teachers some lead time. As he said, like they gave him Chromebooks a year before, maybe not a year, but the teachers need some time to really learn it and work with it. And I think Ethan Mollick says you need at least 10 hours with AI to be able to fully understand it. And you need to be able to use it in your own application because it's going to be different for everybody. And so we recommend that they do that, give the teachers some time, not just train them one day and then turn students loose the next day. And give them some time, give them also some PLC where they work together, talk about their successes and their struggles and learn from each other. And then, it's time to bring it to the students. I feel a real urgency to bring it to the students, but I also very cautious about doing that too quickly. And so we've had guidelines for almost a year now, and we only have a handful of schools where students are routinely using the tools, especially like the frontier models. I mean, some of them will use like school AI and some of those that are more teacher directed. But we're okay with that because those schools are taking that slow, steady, safe approach. But I do feel like that, I like to say that students should be learning about AI, even if they're not ready to be learning with it. And I think that we really need to be pressing forward on that AI literacy for students, even if they're not using the tools, which they will need to do to get a full depth and breadth of AI literacy, but they need to be learning about AI generated media, deep fakes, and some of the things out there that they're encountering every day. And of course, they're using AI anyway. And so we need to also be talking to them about, what AI is, what it's not. There's this concern of students building relationships with it, and all of that is going on, whether we're ready or not. And so we need to be working on preparing our students for that. And so that's my long answer.
It was not long at all. And it's wonderful. Actually, I attended an event at the Friday Institute there in North Carolina. You might have been there as well, I think. And it was very rewarding to see the real deep thought that's going into how these tools can roll out. and how they can be used. You broached an interesting subject, and that was students learning about AI before they're learning with AI. I guess I would extend on the first question around evaluating or adopting these tools. Does your answer change any if you're talking about the tools being applied directly in instruction or with other use cases within school district? Because in many cases, school districts are a business, and they're going to have the same kind of business drivers that many other businesses have. So does your answer change any, and how does it change when we're talking about direct to students versus the deployment within a school system?
Well, there are definitely more concerns if it's a tool that's you're putting directly in the hands of students. Of course, you've got all of the, COPPA and all of those concerns, but those also apply even to a teacher tool. But I think that they're definitely going to be vetted a little more heavily if the intent is that they're student facing. And a lot of people also, they need to understand that just because a tool says that, it's safe and it's for, and it doesn't necessarily have that age requirement. Most of them are wrappers, which are just built on ChatGPT, and they have a few extra safeguards. The technology is just too new to trust it completely. And so even those tools, like we've actually in North Carolina, don't recommend that any elementary school kids engage with chatbots because of that, because of some things that could happen. The tools are not, I just don't think they're ready yet for that. And those students are not ready yet to make the critical thinking and ethical decisions they need to make to evaluate it for bias and evaluate it for inaccuracies. And so, the age limit of the student also, I think, has a big effect on what we would recommend.
Pete, any thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think Vera's made some really good points, and it should give everyone who's listening pause, because our initial thought is, well, which tool? And I know this because I get asked all the time, which tool should we buy to blank? Right. And, backing up to what Vera was saying, frankly, like elementary students at this point shouldn't be on any artificial intelligence tool, especially in schools, for a number of reasons. And yet we can still talk about it with them. Right. I mean, you don't have to have the tool in your hand to be able to understand what it might do. And I think we need to get ahead of the game and start teaching more critical thinking skills, because we have to have those, one, to write good prompts, but two, to look at the results and to say, this makes sense. And this is, a good answer, or that this looks like there might be something in there that's not right. So you have to have that ability to think critically. I think many people are afraid, and this will come true if we're not careful, that it will remove critical thinking from a conversation, because you'll just take, cut and paste, and that's it. You haven't thought through it at all. Well, if we allow students to do that, that's our fault, right? Mm-hmm. And this will then continue like down the negative road that we've seen with social media, where, we maybe could have had opportunities to teach students how to, vet what they're seeing, what they're hearing, to understand a lot of that's made up, so don't go comparing yourself against unreal things. And I think that's an excellent point. So in other words, we can't take the human out of the loop. The idea that we are just going to plug something into a tool and get something out, this isn't a calculator. This is much more complex and has ethical implications. It has all types of implications in terms of even your thinking about your self-worth and things like that. I mean, it goes into that metaphysical universe maybe. So we have to be very careful, but we should begin now. We should begin now in terms of helping students understand kind of the pros, the cons. What is this? The things that Vera was mentioning. And also, the ability to think. Now, this is a science teacher coming out in me, going back to the day, but we need to help them to think critically. Like if you have a scientific theorem, you have to think through that critically. If you have an answer from a chatbot, you have to think through that critically. And I think that it can be a great opportunity if we take advantage of the opportunity.
And I would just add on to that, because you made some really great points, but communication also, that's something our elementary students really need to be mastering, because if you think about it, if you break this down, a lot of people try to make it sound very complex, like you're engineering, but really you're just communicating with the models. And the people who can communicate the best and express themselves the clearest are going to get the best results from the models. And so that those basic skills that they need in elementary school, I think still need to be the focus. But yeah, they definitely can talk about AI. And I think also, I don't know if every state has it, but in North Carolina, we have K-12 computer skills. And so there are computer science skills for those little babies too. And a lot of times I think they're not tested. So it's hard, it's hard to compete with math and reading whenever there's not a test at the end of the year. But if they're really being given validity, those computer science skills will really help them to get the algorithmic thinking and all of that down so that whenever they do encounter AI, they will understand it better and they will be able to relate to it better. And the same thing with the digital literacy. And like we follow the ISTE standards. I think about every state does. And so those ISTE standards as well for students, the creativity, collaboration, communication, computational thinking. So all of those things really do need to be infused all the way through elementary, as well as starting to learn about it. Because even in kindergartner, you can show them an AI generated dog and a real picture of a dog and just show them how similar they are. And they can start making some of those connections with AI that they've been exposed to in their lives, their parents using GPS and facial recognition and all of that. And they can start understanding it a little bit. But I feel very strongly they should not be engaging with it, like people creating like character bots and things. I don't think our elementary school students should be engaging with those.
No, there have been a lot of things proposed that AI could do, but I think are really bad ideas.
Yeah. Just because it can do it doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right. This is very powerful.
Absolutely. And this is a great question. So where do those policies start? How do we build the right policies and where do we do that from?
Great question. I think the very first thing is you don't start with policy. You start with something even smaller than policy, which is administrative guidelines that might be connected to a policy you already have, like your responsible use or acceptable use policy. Every school district has that. That's how we've been kind of managing internet, rules of the road, if you will. And so I think you just create an administrative guideline that helps create the guardrails that we were talking about. I think, like I said, North Carolina's done some good work in terms of saying this is when teachers can kind of think about, how to red light, green light something in terms of when it's allowed and what are the expectations accordingly. Teach AI has a really good set of tools. They have a AI guidance for schools toolkit. These are the folks that, create a lot of computer science curriculum. Code.org has this kind of side group called Teach AI. And in their slide deck, which is called AI Guidance for Schools, they have one slide that's just like 5 different things that teachers can put in place so that you can put into an administrative guideline that says, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And it's very simple. We want to make it really complicated and create some policy that's passed by the board. But as soon as you do that, something changes. So I think you start with administrative guidelines and then work your way. And of course, this is in the United States. It's different in other countries, but that would be the way it would work here, I think. And then you work your way into other things that might be part of the student handbook that are kind of, again, still lower than the policy level where the school board is, putting their stamp of approval on it. And then you start realizing that there are some things that the school board should set in concrete, and then those become policies. I know that there have been a lot of conversations about state and federal policies, but I think like North Carolina, Indiana have done, just sort of setting some expectations for schools and providing those guidelines is probably the best thing to do, as opposed to saying thou shalt or thou shalt not with a policy from the feds or your state department.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for North Carolina, of course, and you probably did the same thing with Indiana, we started with looking at the international and national policies or guidelines from the U.S. Department of Education, Teach AI, AI for Education, different people out there that had already done some work. And of course, I also recommend looking at other state guidelines. When we did ours, when I first started it, there were only 2. And so it wasn't a lot to compare with. But now I think we're up to 24, 25. I've kind of lost count.
Yeah, we might
So,
be at 30.
yeah, people who are still doing it now, there's lots of examples out there to follow and to kind of pull from. And so from a state perspective, we did that. And we did go with the guidelines rather than policy for all the reasons he said. It needs to be nimble. It needs to be a living document. And I have had to update it already. I think I'm on update 11 today. And so things are, changing rapidly. And then we're also just learning more as we go along, adding things that we discovered. And for the school systems in our state, we would expect them to, of course, be familiar with our state guidelines. And most of them are, and some of them have taken and kind of drilled them down, made them smaller, just use those as a reference and then made one-pagers. But I think it does need to be like a top-down approach, of course, at a school level. You want to make sure you're following your district guidelines, and the district wants to make sure they're following the state, and then right on up the way. And I think that's always the best thing. But we do, of course, we're local control. I think most everybody is. And so unless it goes through legislation, we don't have mandates really. Ours are the considerations and recommendations. And that's also partly because our demographics are so different in North Carolina. And then most places are. We have some very, very rural schools, some very big urban schools, just some tiny charters and things like that. So it's going to be different also, of course, depending on your own demographics and how your school or your system runs. And so that gives them some flexibility to make it work for them.
Yeah. Expectations of your community. I mean, there's so many different considerations. We need to leave it to the local school boards and administrative teams, I think. I do think that, guidance like many states have done is a great idea. The U.S. Department of Education provided some guidance just recently. It just came out. It's pretty good. It's just sort of, again, high level, but a good place to start if you're not sure what you should be doing and what you should be talking about. But there should be district level conversations at the cabinet level, reporting back to the school board on, what your direction is. And then that should be them putting these, guidelines and practices into place.
Yeah. I often hear, or I've heard several times in different circumstances, a discussion about policy. If policies are laid down before they really are created and controlled, the guidance and the proper implementations out in the field, then you really run the risk of running amok and messing things up. So it sounds like it's kind of a ground up approach is really the best approach.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about equity and protecting equity with the adoption of AI tools. I've had some guests on before that have talked about some of the real dangers in equity with AI. I also have had folks talk about the opportunity, and I like to look at the positive side of this, but I think there is a chance to level the playing field, but it takes some real conscious focus on that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that concept.
Well, I'm happy to start. I think the biggest consideration with equity is just making sure that everybody has access equally, because I think the greatest danger that we have really is because of the job market, and it is going to and is already impacting the job market, that if it gets siloed in computer science or in AP classes or AIG, or CTE even, then we run the risk of a large segment of our population not having access to this learning. And if those students that are depending on the schools for their access and for their learning are going to go compete for the jobs with those folks that have more privilege, or we know that computer science and AIG and AP classes are historically not going to include some of our lower socioeconomic students that are marginalized communities and ethnic groups. And so I think if we don't approach it from the beginning as making sure that it's infused throughout all subjects and all grades, that's our first risk of equity, is making sure that those students, and then a big part of it also is, of course, learning how to evaluate the tools and evaluate the outcomes, because they definitely do have the propensity for bias, and we want to make sure we're not promoting any of those stereotypes. I personally feel like, at least on the surface level, that has improved drastically in 2 years. I mean, you could make it the most racist thing in the world very easily when it was out of the gate. And that is not so easy done now. So I think they've done a really good job, especially with the racial and gender bias. I think those have been addressed a lot. But I think the biggest concern now is political biases, that they're definitely in there, but also the ability to lead it. I mean, these things, they want to please you. And so, you have to also, as a user, be seeking objective content, unbiased content, as well as evaluating it. And I've seen it done in the reverse. I've seen people lead the models and create biased content, and that's kind of alarming. That they would be used in that way, because there's also studies done on how persuasive they are. I don't know if you saw, it was a funny story this week where a little robot in China went and persuaded a bunch of big robots to leave the job. Did you see that? Well, told them they were being treated unfairly and they were being overworked and they weren't being paid for it, and got all those robots to leave. It's a little Terminator vibe there going to, but seriously, thinking about one AI system being able to persuade another AI system is on a whole different level. But they also can be very persuasive, because especially our students, and most people, they're just trusting blindly because it comes out of a computer. And so all of that goes back to the AI literacy, though, teaching them to prompt correctly for unbiased content is part of it, teach them how to evaluate for it.
I agree with everything that Vera said. I think that probably the biggest equity issue we have as we speak today is that many school districts are filtering, and I understand where they're coming from. But so you can't get to GPT, you can't get to, whatever, Gemini or whatever it might be in terms of chatbot, when they're in the school or on a school device on their network. In other words, it's getting filtered. And I understand why that is happening on one level, where they don't have anything in place right now. So, they're putting a pin in it, if you will. But the longer you wait with that, the more equity issues you have, because what that means is, like in our district, we were an urban district. And so I know for a fact that although probably 90% of my high school students had a phone, that many of them did not have data plans. Many of them depended on our network to get the data. And then when they walked out of the building and got far away from the Wi-Fi, they had nothing until they got to the Starbucks or wherever else they're picking it up. And they may be able to get on there, but obviously that doesn't have the capacity for all the students that might need it. And so essentially what you're doing is you're creating an environment of the haves and the have-nots, because the ones that already have data plans, they probably also have home internet service, probably high speed. On top of that, they may even have purchased, a chatbot, a monthly account. And so the challenge then becomes, how do you keep the playing field even? That's a huge conversation. Obviously, there's a number of factors that go into deciding what you're going to do. But I think many are complacently sort of sitting on that. Here we are now, we're coming up on about the time ChatGPT was released, 2 years ago. So it's been a while. And so if you're still sitting on it, you probably need to be making some decisions and putting some things in place. How do you level that playing field? Because before it was, you didn't have a device, you didn't have, home access. And so, there have been solutions to that. But if those are all filtered, then that doesn't make it accessible. So I think that's one level. I agree. We need to not sequester this in one subject area or one area. It naturally is in all of them, right? I mean, if you go look at the real world, you've got everyone from coders who have to know how to use ChatGPT or whatever the tool is to be able to write code, to be able to have that job. Like, you can't do coding today without using generative AI. You just can't, because the first third of all the work is going to happen there, and you're going to be 1/3 more efficient. And that's what this is about, essentially. Businesses aren't going to hire you if you don't have that skill set, like today. In other areas, maybe tomorrow or maybe in 5 years, but as our students graduate, they're coming out as a disadvantage if they don't have that skill set. So then how do we give them the skill set I say, starting with critical thinking to all the other pieces that we have discussed, that is the biggest part of the front end of the strategy, I think, when you're talking about it at the district level, to be able to allow equity to be the case in your school district in terms of access to.
I agree totally.
It was interesting. I had a recent conversation about this, and what was highlighted was the fact that ChatGPT requires so much actual ability to read, and your literary skill, your skills, reading skills, really make a difference in terms of your access to this tool. And this came out in the process of them trying to put a controlled study with some students using the tools, and very quickly highlighted not just the risk of it, but also the opportunity. So now maybe we use this to improve literacy amongst students and use it as a motivator or use it as a measure in that fashion.
Reading and writing. I mean, writing a good prompt means writing a good question. That's what it is.
It is.
It's a little more complex than that, but I mean, that's basically what it is. If you can write a good question, you can write a good prompt. And if you write a good prompt, you get your answer, aligned answer, I guess, the best answer. So I would agree that there are opportunities here, as you say, Patrick, that are just extraordinary. So we can't just keep it as simple as, well, just buy this tool, and I could list 20 of them right now, and it's going to take care of that for you. Well, it might solve some problems, but are those problems we're trying to solve? Getting back to the first conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And on the reading piece also, there's an access issue. Like a lot of people are talking about banning cell phones. And one of the concerns I have with that is the ChatGPT app, and all of them have vocal capabilities now, but now that they're going multimodal, that ChatGPT app is phenomenal. Like for students who are not native English speakers, it can be a live translator for you. And for students who don't read well and don't type well, have dyslexia or some kind of any kind of reason why they can't type well, they can just speak to it and it can speak back. And I use it all the time when I'm driving because I spend a lot of time driving. And so we're also going to be restricting people from having that access as well. And there was a recent study that came out by Common Sense Media called The Dawn of the New Era. I don't know if you saw that, but it talks about the discrepancy between parents' understanding of what kids are doing and what they're doing. But in that study, they had 70% of the students were weekly users of AI. And they also, interesting thing that showed up in that is that the Black and Hispanic populations are using it a lot more in a lot more variety of ways. And one of them is getting help with homework. And of course, the Hispanic students were using it a lot more for translation, but they're also using it for coding and building apps and things like that, which of course is going to help them in the job market in the future. But they also were using it for some more negative ways, like for companionship and for seeking help advice. And so that goes back to that AI literacy piece again, that, that they're needing that. But I thought it was a very interesting study.
Very good. We've talked several times about training and, support for how the tool is deployed and how the tools can be used. It's clear that ongoing support is important here. How do we ensure that we have the right professional development and support layers in place as these tools get adopted and used more in schools?
Well, that's the $1 million question, because so many competing priorities. In our state, we're adopting a whole new student information system, and that's kind of like sucked all the wind out of the training time. It's taken all of the training, and we did letters before that for elementary. So just I feel like our teachers in our schools don't get enough professional development time, for one. And in what little time you do have it's usually, scheduled up months in advance, and, it's like scheduled up for the whole year in June. And so that's what we're trying to do, is trying to work ourselves into that cycle, that training cycle. And we're starting a train the trainer model in January for North Carolina. We're hoping every PSU or public school units will send people to be trained. And then they're having to make a commitment that they will allow that time for training for the teachers and students in the next school year. But that's the thing, is just trying to fit it into all of the 5 million hair on fire priorities that they have, because they're all, you can't say, we'll bump this out as less important, because they're all super important. And helping them to see, a lot of people don't understand. They don't think that AI ranks up there with those others. And I think it's important that we have the ability to talk to them and show them. And that's what I try to do as much as I can, is get in front of leadership audiences, because no matter how many teachers know how to use it or go on to things on their own, if the leadership in the district is not allowing it, not making a way, not making a way for students to use it, then it's really not going to go anywhere. And so that has to kind of be from a top down, to make sure that it's really infused and that students are really having that opportunity.
I would agree with everything. I think, again, what is our purpose? When we're doing this professional development, like Vera says, we're competing with everything else going on. So I think we have to have a clear purpose for what the PD is supposed to be providing. Is this tool training on how to use a specific, or is this helping you in, writing your lesson plans and rubrics, or, what is it that we're trying to do? It can do so many things. You could spend 40 hours a week in training for 3 weeks and not be done if you don't have a clear focus. So, what school districts need to understand is kind of going back to that first part. What's your why? What are you trying to accomplish? How does it fit in with your strategic plan? And then therefore, what type of training should teachers be receiving? My thought is, in most cases, the initial training is, what are we talking about with generative AI, and what are the ways it can make impact? And then getting information back from the teachers to say, how can this best help the work you want to do? Because as a former, I guess I always think of myself as still an educator, but as a former high school teacher, I think, man, this could have achieved so many things I wish I had a magic genie to help me with. And we now have amazing tools, depending on what you're trying to do these amazing things. But we have to start with something, and it needs to be really clear and crisp, I think, because it can easily get muddled because of all the opportunities and options that there are. So strategy from the top is really critical.
One kind of final question, I guess, that I would ask here is there anything that we've missed here? Obviously, we haven't talked about security, but is there anything else that we are missing in this discussion? And if you'd like, please comment on the security component or any others.
I'll jump in. I think we haven't really talked about student data privacy, and the fact that one of the things that is evolving very quickly right now are small language models that will be adopted by schools that are using their data to parse it and, basically have an internal AI tool. And that will require A, really good data. So start scrubbing now. And B, you're dealing with personal identifiable information. And so we need to have clear student data policies in place for everything right now, clear software license agreements that look at student data privacy in place now, and then adopt that and adapt it as necessary as we're starting to talk about AI tools. I think that's something that is really critical to have a conversation about, but that's a whole big conversation in and of itself.
Yep. And we'll invite you back for that one, Pete, because we will spend some time on that.
Yeah, that is a huge concern. North Carolina, before the AI, even before generative AI really came out, started with a third-party data integration plan, and it was very painful to start with. But I think we've kind of have worked through it, and so our districts have kind of a pretty high bar, and vendors have a high bar to meet in order to get in the North Carolina system now, which is good. And it's actually has made some vendors make some adjustments to some of the things. And especially if it's a really big district, some of the smaller districts don't have as much bargaining power. But I think that's, having some rules and requirements like that really helps with that. But I think a lot of it goes down to the user level too. I think any security person will tell you that's the biggest weakness. The weak link is the users, and making sure that your users are well educated, and opens up a whole new realm of security concerns. And so I think districts also need to make sure a lot of times teachers don't really understand what apps they can and can't use, and that just because you can sign in with Google or Microsoft or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that it passes, that it meets muster. And I may or may not have done that at one time, just had my kids sign in with Google because I thought that was okay. I thought that, and so we need to make sure our teachers understand what our third-party data processes are, and how to, if you want something that's not allowed, to make sure that you know how to request it. But a lot of ours have gotten a whole lot more locked down in the last couple of years, and I think it's important to help them understand why, that they're not just being mean and trying not to let you use the cool tools, but just because TikTok's cool doesn't really mean it's the best thing to use in your class. They need to understand that it's because they're protecting student data. And a lot of teachers don't follow tech news much, and so they don't realize how widespread the data breaches are, and all of the terrible things that have happened over the last few years started getting really bad in COVID. And I think I've heard that schools are as much of a target for bad actors as banking institutions now. And so that's a reality that they need to be understanding.
Yeah, we're a bigger target because we're easier to breach.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of us, and we've got money and
money.
social security numbers.
Yeah.
And social security numbers, right? They want that personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
Plus, it lies hidden for how long before it potentially is exposed.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Kid turns 21, goes and gets a car, or tries to get a car, and they find out, that they're.
I'd advocate too that vendors, ed tech vendors, are very important part of our ecosystem. They play a major role, but they also are they're for-profit corporations, which I appreciate. I want them to make money and stay in business, but at the same time, they need information from us on what we're looking for, what we think is important, so that they can draw the lines when they are creating products in terms of what this should and shouldn't do, what's off the table. And right now, this is a little bit of the Wild West, and so everybody's doing whatever they can do. And just to be honest, it's expedient and cost-effective to do things that might not be in the best interest of student data privacy, and just sort of see how it goes. You can't do that.
No.
So we have to really advocate for, the importance of student data privacy, and advocate for even what are the specific needs and use cases that we see for those districts that are larger. To your point, Vera, they can have a big impact. We've seen that over the years with different organizations where we're trying to press towards standards. And there's an initially kind of a little pushback, because of course they have to spend money and they're not getting any more money for the money they spend. It's not efficient, but at the same time, it serves our students better. It serves our school districts and our instructors better. So we have to be really clear with our vendors on what we expect and what we need.
Well, I think this has been a very enlightening conversation for me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and if I could just summarize a couple of takeaways, and I'd like you to comment on what I miss in this, because I'm sure I'll miss something. But it's clear that the best way to go about adopting this new technology is much like we've done in the past, but is to partner with educators, partner across the spectrum of the stakeholders, and to start with a plan. Start by educating and informing, setting expectations, setting some guidance, and then ongoing support once the tools start to get used, so that you can further refine and tweak how they're actually being used. It's important to start with the lower risk areas, maybe business processes, maybe teachers, then students, and then eventually getting out to students and in some cases, maybe not even getting to some of the younger students with these tools, but there has to be some structure and control around that. First and foremost, you can't take the human out of the conversation. And so often that resonates time and time again. We hear this tool's great, but it has flaws, and we have to make sure that the human is still part of that ultimate decision. I loved the conversation that we had around guidelines rather than policies, and creating these guidelines that are as close to the user community as possible, and can continuously be enriched and moved up to aggregate those across broader populations, but starting close to the user is is really important. And access is one part of equity here. So we have to find a balance between making this available to everybody, regardless of what their circumstances are, but weighing that against the possible data privacy concerns, the student data privacy information. So we have to do it, but we have to do it with forethought, and probably a little caution is a better answer than overly wild west. But at the same time, we go too slow and we'll get left in the dust, and the kind of ambition will take over. So it's something that we have to continuously monitor. Did I capture that accurately? Is there something that I missed?
Yeah, I don't think ChatGPT could have done any better.
Nicely said, Vera. I agree.
You both have been wonderful. I appreciate the time. I hope everybody else has learned as much as I have today. I hope you'll agree to come back and talk to us again as we go down this path and adopt, have these tools out there more and more, and we'll come back together to talk about the successes.
Nice to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And for us here on the podcast today, this is the end of our episode. We hope we see you again real soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.